With tariff talks top of mind, South Florida farmers say they are in trouble. Crops are rotting on the vine and they're blaming the ongoing trade wars and immigration changes. If you value the qualitative as opposed to merely the quantitative, I think you'd opt for the Canadian system over the American one. You may have once believed American agriculture was an eternal symbol of pride. Endless fields stretching to the horizon, grain silos towering like mountains, convoys of trucks shipping harvest across the globe. But now, in the middle of 2025, that image is slowly fading into memory in states like Iowa, Kansas, and Nebraska. Places that once fed the world, farmers are watching corn rot in the fields, and soybeans sit untouched in silos. No buyers, no trucks, no movement. Meanwhile, north of the border, Canadian farmers are popping champagne, exports are soaring, orders from China. South Korea and the Philippines are flooding in. America first was supposed to be the saving grace. Now it's turning into a nightmare for the very people who believed in it the most. And while frustration rises across rural America, the real question is, can life on these farms ever go back to normal, or is this just the beginning of something far worse? Welcome to the most dramatic reversal in American agriculture. In decades, wheat falls into negative orders as Canada and Russia step in. Wheat, once hailed as the soft gold of rural America, is now turning into a burden no one wants. But the real fear isn't the price, it's two simple words. Negative orders, according to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture in just the last week of May 2025. The total number of wheat contracts canceled actually exceeded new sales. The result, net orders dropped to 4,100 metric tons. This isn't just a red number on a spreadsheet, it's a minus sign. Driven straight into the heart of American agriculture, farmers can live with low prices, but no buyers. Even after slashing prices, that's a blow to pride. And that blow is being delivered in the most painful way possible, silence South Korea. Once a loyal customer has shifted all its wheat contracts to Russia and Eastern Europe. The Philippines, who've bought American wheat for over 30 years, abruptly turned to Australia, no goodbye, no warning. The official reasons sound polite: supply optimization and logistics risk management. But everyone knows what it really means: growing unease with a U.S. export system that's no longer reliable. Washington's delays in stabilizing supply chains are costing long-standing partners their patience and their trust. Across the Great Plains, amber waves of wheat are headed for a harvest no one wants. Flour mills in Kansas and South Dakota have paused expansion plans because they're no longer sure they'll have enough wheat to process. And in Minneapolis, grain terminals have issued a hold order, refusing to take in more product, because the storage bins are already full, with nowhere to send their crop. Desperate farmers are turning to a last resort, grinding their wheat into livestock, feed mixed with bran. They call it the desperate man's exit. But with beef and pork prices also in free fall, even that narrow exit is closing fast. Unlike soybeans or corn, wheat carries a cultural weight. It's in every loaf of bread, every breakfast table across America, from the countryside to the cities. But when even the most basic staple can't find a buyer, the issue isn't a weak market, it's a crack in the foundation of trust. And Canada, Russia, they don't need to make bold moves, they just have to stay steady, be dependable, and wait, because in today's world, stability wins. America isn't losing its place because it can't compete, it's losing it because it can't hold on to the relationships that were built over decades. With time, with patience, and with trust, soybeans crash 30% while Brazil takes over the market. Once the undisputed crown jewel of American agriculture, soybeans are now being treated like outdated inventory on the global market. According to data from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, soybean prices have plummeted from $14.97 per bushel in late 2023 to just around $10,010 in the first half of 2025, a drop of more than 30%, and with the average cost of growing a bushel hovering near $9. 65 cents today's price is less a profit margin and more like a blade slicing straight through it. But price isn't the only problem. The bigger issue, there's nowhere to sell as long-time customers pivot. Elsewhere, U.S. soybean market share is evaporating like water draining from a cracked basin. Meanwhile, Brazil, with its humid climate and fertile red soil, is quickly becoming the California of the Southern Hemisphere for soy production. In the first quarter of 2025 alone, Brazil captured over 70% of soybean imports across key Asian nations, and the U.S. shut out before it even saw it coming. In Iowa, some large-scale farms have turned to leasing private cold storage just to keep their soybeans a few extra months, hoping for a rebound. But time doesn't wait. Mold pests and rising. Paused storage full soybeans aren't just a crop for many families. They're the retirement plan, the college tuition, the mortgage payment that depends on every harvest cycle. Now, it all feels like one big roulette wheel, except the odds of winning keep shrinking by the day while Brazil continues to expand its port at Santos and signs new international supply deals. American farmers are filling out loan and restructuring paperwork, or worse, preparing bankruptcy filings for fall. And in this fight for survival, perhaps the most painful part isn't losing the money, it's the feeling of being left behind sorghum. The Western icon wiped out in just 60 days. There was a time when you mentioned the golden grain of the West, and no one thought of corn, they thought of sorghum, not because it yielded more, but because it stood for resilience, drought, hardened, unshakable, stubborn, in the best way, just like the farmers of Kansas and Texas, who've planted it season after season, but now that symbol of endurance is collapsing so fast, no one even saw it coming. According to USDA data, U.S. sorghum exports plummeted by 94% in the first 60 days of 2025. That number doesn't need dramatizing. It's already deafening in Stockton, Kansas, once dubbed the High Plains capital of sorghum grain silos that used to run non-stop, are now stuffed to the brim, and padlocked locals call them the tombs of the harvest, because every kernel inside is buried money, buried hope. This sudden collapse triggered a brutal domino effect. Sorghum prices dipped below corn, something almost unheard of. Worse yet, no one's buying. Not even at fire sale prices in the Texas Panhandle, traders started mixing sorghum into livestock feed, not for nutrition but just to stop the bleeding. But when even pork and beef markets are drowning in oversupply, where does the grain go, Bob Graham? A longtime farmer near Amarillo who once sowed 2,000 acres of sorghum is now sitting out of season. A softer way of saying he can't afford the seed, I used to think crop failure was the worst case scenario. He says turns out losing the market is even scarier. No buyers, no storage, no credit lines. Sorghum farmers are trapped in a loop that only spins tighter. Community banks across the Great Plains have begun raising margin requirements to 15% loans for fertilizer diesel, or crop insurance are under scrutiny like never before growing a crop. You can't sell is like writing a symphony. No one hears, no matter how beautiful the melody, silence is all that remains. And in a farmer's world, silence is the sound of collapse. Sorghum once stood for the grit of the American West, but if even it can't survive, we're left with a chilling question: what's left that's strong enough to withstand the storm of collapsing prices and crumbling trust? Meat industry in turmoil, containers rot in the sun. There's no sound more haunting to a farmer than the metallic click of a sealed container in midsummer. Not because of theft, but because inside are tens of tons of meat slowly rotting away since early April 2025. Major U.S. ports like Los Angeles, Savannah, and Houston have reported a chilling, yet ironically named phenomenon. A cold clog frozen meat containers held for supplemental inspection are left waiting without enough staff or infrastructure to preserve them. The result, dozens of truckloads of pork, beef and poultry worth millions turn into bow waste in just a few days of peak heat. This isn't happening because there's no product. It's happening because the product has nowhere to go. According to the U.S. Meat Export Federation, nearly 1,000 meat processing plants are stuck in pending review for export permits. A bureaucratic limbo that's frozen logistics in place. Shipping companies uncertain of clearance have pulled back. Meanwhile, cold storage costs at ports have skyrocketed from $400 to over $1,200 per container in emergency cases. And as the ripple effects deepen, carriers start cancelling routes. No one wants their ship carrying cargo that might be rejected. The fallout containers loaded with meat sit baking in the sun like frozen tombs, bearing the labor of hundreds of farms and the wages of thousands of workers in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. A meat plant that once ran 3 shifts a day is now down to 1, and even that shift doesn't have enough work. Hog farms in Iowa are cutting herds, not for lack of feed, but for lack of buyers. One operation in Minnesota had to offload nearly 600 pigs in a single day at prices 40% below cost. The domestic market felt the shock instantly, and not in a good way. With exports halted, the overflow of meat flooded the U.S. market, but instead of lowering prices across the board, the impact fractured big chains, hoarded cheap meat, while rural groceries and remote states saw prices spike due to transportation. Surcharges shoppers were left confused. Why is? Farms in Iowa are cutting herds, not for lack of feed, but for lack of buyers. One operation in Minnesota had to offload nearly 600 pigs in a single day at prices 40% below cost. The domestic market felt the shock instantly, and not in a good way. With exports halted, the overflow of meat flooded the U.S. market, but instead of lowering prices across the board, the impact fractured big chains, hoarded cheap meat, while rural groceries and remote states saw prices spike due to transportation surcharges. Shoppers were left confused. Why is victor of today's agricultural crisis were a chess match? Canada, once dismissed as a background pawn, has now made its quiet advance across the board and emerged as a queen. In under a year, Canadian agricultural exports have surged more than 38%, a staggering leap that most developed economies could only dream of, from wheat and soybeans to frozen meats. Maple syrup and even livestock feed, anything bearing the label product of Canada, is now being snapped up on international markets like it's gold dust. But here's the twist. Canada didn't sprint to the front. They simply stood still and let others drop the baton as U.S. shipping lanes got snarled, as our ports drowned in container backlogs. Canada's ports Vancouver and Montreal shifted into full throttle. No new infrastructure needed, no major investment blitz, just a calm, steady hand, ready to catch the business that American farmers lost in Saskatchewan. Once dubbed the breadbasket of the North, farmers are now hosting trade reps from Asia instead of fighting for line credit. Alberta saw frozen meat exports spike 23% in Q2 2025 alone. And here's the bitter punchline. Canadian freight companies are now leasing empty containers from the U.S. to ship their own products out. A painful paradox American ports watch. Empty boxes sail away, while Canadian ports load them with goods heading for markets we once dominated in Ontario and Quebec. Buy Canadian has evolved beyond patriotic sentiment. It's now official strategy. U.S. products are losing shelf space, while Canadian brands expand their footprint. And the Canadian government, it's not playing defense, it's accelerating more investment in logistics. Expanded port funding, new incentives for farmers to shift crops toward high-demand markets. In other words, while American farmers wrestle with unsold stock and tightened bank loans, their Canadian counterparts have the green light to scale up. Canada was once our ally, shoulder to shoulder in every ton of meat, exported every bushel shipped abroad. But when America slowed down, they didn't wait. They moved on and moved ahead. American farmers face a tidal wave of bankruptcy. If there's one thing etched into the DNA of the American farmer, it's resilience. They've weathered droughts, floods, disease, and price crashes. But what they're facing in 2025 isn't a natural disaster. It's an invisible undertow, pulling them toward the bottom bankruptcy, according to the federal court system. Chapter 12. Bankruptcy filings designed specifically for farmers and fishermen have surged over 55% compared to 2023, and the climb continues month after month. But behind each statistic lies a lost farm, a displaced family, and a three-generation legacy locked away without a sound. Unlike other professions, when a farmer declares bankruptcy, he doesn't just lose income, he loses his land, his home, his machinery. Sometimes even the upcoming season. Every crop cycle is tied to a loan, and if that loan can't be repaid, the bank won't just close the account. They'll come take the tractor, the grain bins, the pickup, and sometimes even the family dog. In Nebraska, a 2,000-acre corn farm was seized after the owners fell 40 short on fertilizer payments that family had lived there for 3 generations. But one bad season, one cancelled export contract, and it all disappeared like dust in the wind. In Ohio, banks are demanding 15–20% higher margins just to extend credit for seed diesel or insurance. Some won't even lend without a guaranteed buyer contract. A near impossibility in a world where orders vanish overnight. This collapse doesn't come with sirens. It creeps in through court letters, tense meetings in back offices, and the quiet sigh of a husband staring at an Excel sheet as red numbers bleed across the columns like blood through linen in South Dakota. One farmer burned the blueprints for a new storage barn he'd planned to build for the 2026 harvest. "No point anymore," he said. "I'm not sure there's anything left for me to plant. This wave of bankruptcies isn't just drowning individuals. It's eroding a collective belief that American agriculture will always stand strong, that farmers will always find a way. But now, with every escape route sealed off by high interest rates, collapsing crop prices, and a supply chain in disarray, we're left with one haunting question. How many more harvests will it take before the Midwest becomes a wasteland?" Asian markets turn away. Trust in U.S. policy is fading. There was a time when a farm contract stamp made in USA was enough to seal the deal in Asian markets. No bargaining needed, not because it was the cheapest, but because it carried something far more valuable: trust and stability. But by 2025, that trust is melting, like the season's first snowfall. Not because America is weaker, but because its partners are realizing it's become unpredictable. In Manila, food manufacturers are rerouting wheat orders from the US to Australia, even at a higher price per ton. Why? Because they can't make long-term plans when freight costs change overnight. Ports clog by next week, and contracts stall for no clear reason. The month after, in Seoul, instant noodle conglomerates. Major consumers of wheat flour have officially demanded origin flexibility clauses in all import deals, meaning if there's any risk with US supply, they can pivot immediately to Russia, Kazakhstan, or Eastern Europe. This isn't a backup plan anymore. It's now standard policy. What does that mean? It means US wheat, once the backbone of Asia's food security, is losing its top spot, not because of quality, but because of instability. And it's not just wheat. Soybeans, pork, corn, and powdered milk are quietly disappearing from import bids in Jakarta, Kuala Lumpur, and Bangkok. No protests, no press conferences, just a quiet shift choosing other sources. And when silence speaks, it's the hardest message to reverse. Asian markets don't want promises. They want consistency, something the US supply chain can no longer guarantee. Delayed containers, jammed ports, returned goods, rising insurance premiums. Every delay cuts revenue, and buyers are now asking, why wait on a partner who's no longer reliable? This shift doesn't make headlines. It's like a train switching tracks in the dead of night. You don't notice until the next morning, when the platform is empty and when longtime allies start choosing Brazil, Australia, or Russia. Instead, the damage goes beyond export numbers. It erodes as a national brand once synonymous with dependability. If trust is the strongest currency in global trade, then America is watching its value slip by the hour. Not because of bad products, but because it's no longer the place where others are willing to bet on long-term plans. And when they stop planning with you, it means they've already started walking away. The logistics nightmare. No containers, no ships, no way out. Logistics once served as the lifeblood of American agriculture, a vast artery connecting Iowa's endless fields to California's bustling ports, and from there to dinner tables across the globe. But in 2025, that artery is so clogged it's on the verge of necrosis. At the port of Portland outbound, shipping volume has plunged 51% in Q1 alone. Tacoma is down 28%, even Los Angeles. America's busiest port has seen nearly 1 in 5 ships vanish on paper. These might read like minor dips, but for those on the ground, it's a full-blown logistical nightmare. Fewer ships, no containers, delayed contracts, and warehouses buckling under backlogged cargo in Kansas. A farmer couldn't find a single 40-foot container to move his corn shipment on time in Iowa. A soybean exporter said it took nearly 11 days just to get a carrier to accept their freight. Every day delayed means more storage fees, higher interest on operating loans, and one more crack in their mental resilience. It's not the old problem of too much crop, not enough trucks. It's now a warped equation container sitting idle, not because there's no cargo, but because there's nowhere to go. Carriers are pulling out of U.S. routes, citing low returns. And one-way imbalance, one major shipping line, even issued a memo, no additional sailings to the U.S. West Coast this quarter unless rates rise by 30%. But the true danger lies in the self-reinforcing spiral. No ships means no movement. No movement means no revenue. No revenue means no reorders, no new trucking contracts, and no payroll. When cash flow seizes up the entire farm top port, supply chain collapses like dominoes in Memphis and Chicago. Key logistics hubs, small freight firms are laying off workers as volume drops over 40%. Year one, Missouri crossdock facility shut down for 3 months due to 0 incoming orders. They called it a technical pause, but everyone knew it was surrendered by another name freight. Once the quiet gear that kept America's AG engine turning is now jammed in a haze of rising costs, empty ship schedules, and eroded confidence. And if a container, once the symbol of globalization, can't even find a route, how is a farmer supposed to find a way out of a ruined harvest? When logistics stall, agriculture suffocates, and that chokehold is spreading from port terminals to farm gates, hour by hour, day by day. American consumers aren't getting a pass either. Canned food prices soar if farmers are fighting for survival out in the fields. American consumer.